Hi there. You might remember when we discussed biases in UX research in an earlier course. In this video, we'll focus on biases that might occur when you moderate usability studies. Remember, a bias is favoring or having prejudice based on limited information. It's important to call out that all humans are susceptible to bias. Yes, even you and me. The key is to identify and become aware of these biases so that you can guard against them. Identifying your own personal biases can be challenging. Because bias is usually unconscious, a lot of times we don't even realize we're experiencing it. But if you know what biases you have, you can take steps to minimize their effects. Let's go over some common biases you or your participants might have during usability studies. Let's start by discussing a couple of biases that you might have as a moderator during a usability study. The first bias is one we've already discussed, implicit bias or unconscious bias. Remember, implicit bias is the collection of attitudes and stereotypes we associate to people without our conscious knowledge. These attitudes and stereotypes are often negative, exclusionary, or disempowering. When recruiting participants for usability studies, any implicit biases you have against a particular user group might impact your expectations for how those participants will interact with the product. Another bias you might have as a moderator during a usability study is serial position effect, which we discussed in a previous video. Serial position effect is a psychological bias that states that when given a list of items, people are more likely to remember the first few and the last few, while the items in the middle tend to blur. Be aware that when you're interviewing participants, the first and last things they reveal might stand out to you more than the feedback in the middle because of the serial position effect. Similarly, your participants might experience the serial position effect. If you give participants a list of instructions, they're more likely to remember the first and last items on the list. Next up, another bias often experienced by participants, friendliness bias. Friendliness bias describes the tendency of people to agree with those they like in order to maintain a non-confrontational conversation. Think about this in the real world. Has your friend ever asked you if you want to eat at their favorite restaurant? Even if you hate the food, you might agree to go to their favorite restaurant in order to avoid confrontation. While this might have benefits in the social world, in the world of usability studies it can present a bit of an obstacle. As a moderator, if you are too friendly and develop too strong a rapport with participants, there's a chance participants will want to agree with you in order to avoid confrontation. This can stop participants from giving honest feedback. Your goal is to improve the product's design, so remind participants that you actually need honest feedback in order to improve the product. The last bias moderators need to guard against is the social desirability bias, which describes the tendency for people to answer questions in a way that will be viewed favorably by others. You've probably seen this happen in your own life. Imagine you're with a group of friends who are talking about a movie they enjoyed. One of them asks you, "Did you like the movie?" And everyone turns to see your response. You're likely to say, "Yes, I loved it," to be viewed favorably by the group, even if you didn't actually love it. Similarly, in usability studies, the social desirability bias can cause participants to focus on the positive aspects of their experience with the product and minimize the negative aspects. One way to guard against this bias is to provide participants with a series of statements that came from other users. Ask participants which statement they most relate to and emphasize that there's no correct answer. Okay, you're becoming a pro when it comes to usability studies. You now know the bias to watch out for when you're conducting a usability study and interacting with participants. Coming up, we'll continue this conversation and share some strategies for reducing your own bias during usability studies. See you there.